With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast with Michael Thompson, hanging out with S.J. Jennings and talking about transformation.
Yeah.
Being transformed and the good that God's up to. We talk about orientation, S.J., all the time. Who I am, where I am, and the good God's up to in my life. This idea that we have a glory, that we bear His image, and He's uniquely, in His DNA that's in us, He's uniquely placed a particular code that is not just how we can pretend to be like Him, but actually how we are going to be like Him.
Right.
Right? More and more and more. And so we talked about transformation just as a subject. I wanted to get it on the table, and we ran out of table.
Yeah.
It's a huge theme. And so what we really want to talk about for the next couple podcast series is the process we brought up last week in transformation known as Awaken, Deepen, and Fulfill. Awaken, Deepen, and Fulfill. And before we talk about Awaken, I just want to get a little bit of process on the table. So over your lifetime, these are I think the words that could describe a person from youth, very, very young. You're awakening to everything. It's just a decade or two of awakening.
Yeah. Everything's new to you.
Yeah. And then through the Middle Ages, your Middle Ages, it's deepening. You know, you've learned a few things, you know a thing or two, and you practice those things, and they become more and more true. You know, fulfillment might be those later stages when you're actually teaching other people how to do it. You know, it's something that's so much a part of you, it's been fulfilled, and now you're entrusted with the opportunity, the responsibility to teach others. So when you think about a life, awaken, deepen, fulfill over a long timeline, but then there's this awaken, deepen, fulfill circular process that's kind of moving along that same line that happens over and over and over and over. You're awakened to things, deepened to things, and then they're fulfilled. And I want to describe that a little bit more, SJ, in saying that awakening is simply you see something that you didn't see before. You're aware. You used that word last time. It's a great word. But you become awake to something. You're sensitive to something that you weren't.
Yeah.
You enjoy something that you didn't used to, or you find that you don't enjoy something that you used to.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say that it could be that you already knew this, whatever the thing might be, a personality trait or a perspective, but your perspective has changed somehow. That can be an awakening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming to understanding, coming awake, seeing something, discovering is a great word for awakening. And again, this is all under the context of transformation. So I want to keep that idea. And now we're getting into the weeds a little bit of how does transformation happen? Well, we become awake to something.
Yeah.
And then we're not going to talk about deepen and fulfill, but let me talk about deepen and fulfill for a second. Because really what we mean by deepening, that's actually where the healing and training take place. And there's an awareness that I need it.
If you want to speak in the physical way, that's where the treatment happens.
Yes, great way to say it.
You become aware of something that needs to be treated. And then you go for treatment.
Or learned. Maybe it's the practicing of something.
Yeah, and in the metaphor,
it's the
though,
learning how.
yeah, it's the...
And then once you learn how, now you practice it. So that's the fulfill. The fulfill is I'm better. The fulfill is I'm practicing. The fulfill usually happens, and this is the marker, there's some kind of validation, there's some kind of initiation, there's something ceremony that happens that shows you, that God will show you that it's now more true. And when I say more true, it's not that it wasn't true before. You own it. It owns you. It's real. It's true. It's more true.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So yes, you were awakened to the idea that God loves you, but fulfillment means you've gone all the way through some kind of a journey of experience, of enjoying, of being loved by God. And now you can tell about it. You can tell the stories of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with those in mind, let's go back up river to just awakening and being awake, paying attention. And I would say the grace in this sometimes is getting it wrong is not the problem, but going away is. Learning is about learning how, and you're going to get some of these things wrong. I mean, I had Jesus wrong 4 decades, literally almost 4 decades. At 38 is when
For 4 decades.
So at 38 is when I came awake
Yeah.
to a different Jesus than I knew.
Right.
And it was stunning.
Yeah.
It was like, wait a minute. Those are great words to describe, or if you can picture it in your mind, wait a minute. You're kidding me.
Yeah.
You're awakening to something when that is the expression
Yeah, man.
of your heart. Betrayal can wake you up like that. Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Really? There can be dire things that we awaken to, which too can be an invitation of God to get you out of a situation that you are somehow in. When you come awake to lies, betrayal, because I've come awake to that as well in warfare.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know I was believing that about myself or about my wife or about my friend, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So awaken is just a critical component to transformation, because now you're aware and you can see something that you don't want, or you see something that you do want. So SJ, let's do this. Let's just tell some stories of awakening. I'll go first.
Go for it.
At 38, I had been reading Wild at Heart, and it was awakening me to some things. Some things I knew because there were words that were familiar in the theological sense and in maybe men's ministry, promise keepers and stuff, but stuff like that every man has an adventure to live, a battle to fight, and a beauty to rescue. I was like,
Right. And that's an awakening to the concepts, right?
Yes.
And so are you moving into deepening if we're talk about how the concepts or your awareness of how the concepts apply directly to you? Is that deepening or is that still awakening?
Until we get more clarity, and I'm going to say it's awakening.
It's still awakening.
Yeah. Awakening is research. Awakening is going against the grain and saying, wait a minute. Awakening, not just a moment, it may be a season. You may have to go explore that. You know my story about when I first heard about the good heart, I was awakened to that. I had to do a lot of research. It was so contrary to what I had grown up hearing. And therefore, what I was experiencing, the lie that I had believed that I was asleep to until I wasn't, produced in me a certain kind of faith walk Christianity that I didn't know there was another kind.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute. My heart's good?
Yeah,
Hang
so
on
that's
a
what I
second.
mean. Those are just a little bits of, I think it's a great question. When does it move to deepening? And we'll talk more about that next week. But I want to say it's when there starts to be a practice.
Right.
Like when I started living and trying to live with this good heart, like breaking in some shoes or learning how. That's what I mean by deepening, more practice. So there can be a long season of awakening, with research, with questions, with conversations about other people, maybe talking to someone who's in the fulfilled stage and they're talking about it, they're teaching about it, and awakening you to it.
Sure.
Having access to them, watching their videos or teaching. I mean, I've done that with Dallas Willard and a lot of his stuff. And yes, Eldridge, Gary Barkalow, A Glory to Your Life. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So those are awakening moments when I felt like my system's being challenged. My rituals are being jerked around a little bit. What I've become comfortable with and has had its fulfilling way in me, that's being rivaled, it's being challenged, it's being run over in some cases. So that's what I mean by staying in the awaken space.
Yeah, and so even before the awakening, though, was there, the way Morpheus would say it, a splinter in your mind in this regard? There was some level of dissatisfaction, something's not quite right.
There's some of that. I like that, dissatisfied. There are other times I can think of, I really wasn't looking to be disrupted or provoked,
It's actually quite inconvenient.
Yes, quite. Yeah, and the theological stuff can be, you know. We so often trade in experiencing God for knowing the answers about God, as if that's the highest level of servitude, is somehow being able to defend God or promote God based on the scriptures, when it's not bad, but I think we've been awakened to a much, much, much better way of experiencing and encountering God, hearing his voice,
Yeah.
knowing his wonderful, wild, and sometimes challenging ways to work, like any relationship can have.
Right.
Right? So it's one thing to learn a new bit of news or information. That's not transformative usually. It might bring about that eventually. But I think I'm trying to explore this idea of things that tend to go against what we believed a few seconds ago.
Now my whole world is different. Yeah, a moment later.
Yeah. And that's where the awaken became to the good heart, to the glory of my life. Those alone, I'm conceding the idea that before I could even tell you that it was awakening, deepening, fulfilling, because I didn't hear those terms, it was awakening, deepening, fulfilling. That was going on.
You can see that in hindsight,
Oh
or
my
could
gosh,
see
yeah.
that in hindsight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the Miyagi moment, right?
That's a great description of it. I had no idea that
Karate
the
Kid
master was after that.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, maybe you're too young or just don't remember and know what I'm talking about. You know, Daniel goes to Miyagi to learn how to fight karate because he's getting picked on, bullied. And Miyagi, the first thing he does is he has him wash all his cars and then wax them and shine them and buff them.
Paint the fence
and all this sand the floor,
all of that.
and all that. And then later on, Daniel reaches this boiling point of, like, I thought you were going to teach karate. And then he shows him that he's actually been teaching him karate all along.
I didn't hear that until just now. Time out. I got to say this because we've made a point of it in the last podcast. And now he said, I'm out of here. I'm just being your slave. I'm just being your servant.
No, you're more than that.
It doesn't work long term, man. It doesn't work. It's not a bad relationship, but awakening from the master servant to the father son, to the bride and bridegroom. I mean, these are
to the friend.
This is relational progression.
Right. How often does it work that way, Michael, with God? I mean, it's a great point. From our perspective, we're his slave, we're his servant, we're his bond servant. We've just got to do what he tells us to do. And it's so much more than that. That's not his perspective of us.
Yeah.
But it's our perspective of us
and him
in the context of our relationship with him.
Yeah.
And so the awakening that we're talking about is really that spiritual awakening to identity too. So when you were in that moment, as you've described before, you're at a Wild at Heart boot camp weekend, you're hearing about the heart is not desperately wicked and all these evil things, but rather you have a good heart.
Yeah. A redeemed heart.
So that's the light bulb comes on. Wait a second. And then you enter into this process. So what did that process of awakening look like? Was it, I know you said you went to seminary and
I was in
seminary
already
at the time. So what happened at that point?
Yeah.
In the context of awakening.
So before I go specific into that, what's coming up in my heart is reflection. If you're going to live this way, awake, you're going to have to think about things and think about what you're thinking about and feel what you're feeling. You're going to have to move a little slower. We did the Godspeed.
Yeah, go back and listen to that, listeners, if you haven't yet.
That's so helpful. So being awake is moving slowly, intentionally, deliberately, with this goal in mind that God's after something. What is it? Right? Proverbs 25:2, it's the glory of God to conceal matters and the glory of kings to seek them out.
To seek it out, yeah.
So I want to awaken to that, okay, he's not hiding them so that I don't find them. He's actually putting them in plain sight and I don't see them.
Yeah.
It's that kind of hiding.
What's coming to mind is a term that our friend Dave Brown utilizes when he's teaching self-defense. And it's being situationally aware.
Such a good example.
Yeah.
So good.
Situationally aware. You're awake to your surroundings. You know what's going on around you. And so the internal, the external stimulus that God would provoke us with and reveal to us, if we don't see it, then it's not going to wake us up,
So we do this in so many other things anyway, SJ. And so I want to tie this back to what happened to me. Again, remember, it is believing so that it affects me in a certain way that God's up to something, God's after something, and it's in me, and it's me. So that alone, awakening to that and deepening in that is really, 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 really helpful. And that happens over time. So I can give 3 or 4 silly examples, and then I'll get back to your question. So what's something that you've repaired recently?
I did the brakes on my car,
Okay.
put new rotors and pads on
There was a
there.
time you didn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
The car's squeaking.
Yeah.
You became awake to the idea that the garage charges 10 times more than just the parts.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is all awakening.
Mm-hmm. Actually,
Right?
the first time it wasn't a squeaking. I remember vividly I was in college and a brake pad fell out of the car.
We tend to drive cars like that in college. I'm
I-
so glad
well,
my
it's like-
girls are out of college.
It stopped making the noise.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I guess it fixed itself.
We put a couple cars out of commission, if you know what that means, like
Oh, yeah.
beyond repair.
Right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in other things though, when you get a diagnosis and you become awakened to a diagnosis from some test that was done,
Right.
all of a sudden you start researching. You start looking this up. What does this mean?
Yeah.
What do these numbers mean? We both have had blood work done recently for
Mhm.
these diets and stuff. So, hey,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean?
Right.
Am I going to be okay?
Numbers are great, but without
context and story, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all of that to say, this is part of this process. My point is, SJ, we practice awakening. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And some are rude awakenings and others are kind of a wooing. And I think God has the ability to go either way, depending on what he's after.
And it's in relationship with him, right? So we
Hey.
interact with different people different ways
Yeah.
in different situations. God would be the same way, wouldn't he? Sometimes, I mean,
No.
what I mean is there's times where it's a rude awakening
Yeah.
and there's times where it's gentle. And I think he knows the difference because he knows us in terms of what's needed. Now, I don't want to move towards, he used a 2x4 upside my head,
Yeah,
right?
that's
It's
another-
one of our least favorite
Yeah.
sayings. But there are
Again,
these
because it
moments
says
of
something about God that,
right, that he's going to
I'm
crack you on the
not
side of the head. with a
sure
2x4.
we're after. But
Yeah.
So back to, I say all that because I want listeners to know it's not one thing. What I thought you were saying, and I was taking objection with, is that it's all going to happen a certain way for everybody. Well, awaken, deep, and fulfill, if I could give them numbers, there might be 2 moments in awaken, 15 in deepening, and then 2 or 3 in fulfill, and then you're back into the next awakening. Or these could be happening simultaneously, and there's 7 or 8 things that have to happen in somebody else's awakening or in your
Mhm.
next one. So it's not formulaic, even though there is a way things work in the kingdom.
Yeah.
I'm learning that. I love that. It's not a formula, and yet there's a way things work in the kingdom. And we're using some words that we believe describe a process that happens to all of God's image bearers, sons and daughters of God, becoming sons and daughters of God. So much has happened to you and me. It can be similar. Does he want to free us from our false selves? Yeah, freedom and false selves are both part of this, how it works. But how it's going to work specifically with you, with me,
Sure.
that's when it's wildly unique. That's when it's
That's right.
wildly customized. And even if it smells like we're talking about a system, we're not. Hold it lightly, because
Very-
God's not
Very
confined
lightly.
to what we're talking about. And
Right.
yet we've seen this happen over and over again. And we can go to the New Testament and the Old Testament.
Sure.
He awakens people to himself. Then they investigate. Then they go through a season or 2 or more, or again and again of other awakenings. I love it in The Chosen. We see it with those guys. I've never seen a series so committed to showing the disciples' process. Not that Jesus isn't the main character in any story, but the camera focuses on them and their discussions, and they are struggling to come awake.
Right.
They don't understand, bless their hearts, and bless our hearts. Bless your heart, listener. This is a part of the sanctification process, a part of the learning how to be who we really are in the kingdom. I love what Graham Cook calls it, how you're known in heaven.
Oh, yeah. That's sweet.
So to become awake, wait, I'm known. I remember coming awake to those ideas. And because they had an effect on me that was good and encouraging and inviting and positive, that's got to be Christianity. There's got to be elements of that, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, hearing that principle about the good heart or about the glory of your life, again, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I had to go research. I needed to know the technical parts of it. And that, oh my gosh, there is biblical support for this.
Yeah, just starting off the question, could this be true? Is this right?
And I wanted it to be, it felt good.
Mm-hmm.
that alone has merit to it. And not everything that feels good. I mean, I get sin and stuff like that, but I'm talking about it landed in a place like, oh my gosh, this changes things. So the investigation began, and that's where a biblical process of research. And every time I was learning and finding it more and more as God's over my shoulder, like, yep, you're on the right track. See, I wrote it right down there in Exodus. Here it is in Jeremiah, and here it is again in Matthew. You're just going, this is good.
You don't have to get into all the details. I would assume at the same time as he's showing you, affirming you, yeah, this is in Scripture. Yeah, this is true. Yeah. I mean, is he revealing things to you about you specifically beyond your exploration? I
great
mean,
question.
was he saying, Michael,
Yep.
you've believed this to be true about me and it's not?
I'll tell you a great awakening in there. When I was messing around, exploring that and investigating that, I was in seminary at the time too, so I had some resources and some people to also talk to. But SJ, one of the wildest things I discovered was this idea that, well, wait a minute, if I have a good heart, Robin does.
Mm-hmm.
See, because I thought my heart was desperately wicked, and I adopted that belief. Well, what am I going to think about you?
Sure.
Well,
or anybody.
You're an idiot because you just are, and every now and then people do something good, but they don't have a good nature. No, the redeemed, the Christ followers do. And so there's got to be a graduation to this idea that not only do I have a good heart, but so does she.
Yeah.
And so do my friends. And we have equipment that God's given us that we can deepen and fulfill. So when those concepts start to move out of research and into development, right? R&D.
Yeah.
You're on the fringe of moving into the next stage, which we'll talk about next week.
As you've alluded to many times, this isn't a linear process. I was thinking about this at the beginning of this episode, Michael. You were talking about the circular awaken, deepen, fulfill, awaken, deepen, fulfill, almost like we've seen them in movies where it's a giant piece of mining equipment and it's almost a corkscrew, going through. So we're moving linearly through time, but if you're moving forward and you're going around in that circle, you end up with a corkscrew.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it is. And I like the analogy too of we're mining for things.
Yeah, I do too.
We're digging into things and moving through this process at the same time.
Yeah. So let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about some things that we're awakening to now.
Okay.
I want to share some stories for our listeners then. We'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast.
Hey listeners, SJ here. Just wanted to let you know about an upcoming event we've got on the calendar for men. It's called the Heart of a Warrior Encounter West, October 21st through the 24th, 2021, at Young Life's Trail West Camp in Buena Vista, Colorado. It is a beautiful camp, and if you've never been to Colorado, this is a great excuse to visit. That's October 21st through 24th, 2021. And if you want more information, visit zoweh.org/events. I hope to see you there.
All right, welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. Story time. A little show and tell with SJ and myself on awakening. So, SJ, if this is a process and we're in it, what would be more current? What is he awakening you to in this season?
Yeah. So, I mean, in order to talk about what's going on currently, I got to talk a little bit about where I've been. It felt like, Michael, to me, in retrospect, especially the first 5 or so years of this message was really learning what the message is, gathering the information, gathering the intel like you did, like you talked about exploring the good heart and kind of undoing some things you had been taught. Well, I didn't grow up in church. That wasn't instilled in me in the way that it was in you.
Right.
And yet I still had to do my own kind of exploration of what is the truth? What is this message that Zoweh is proposing? And I think the first major awakening, like we're talking about, probably started in about 2016, about 4.5 years ago. And I've talked about this, I've told this story before, where this word of the year God gave to me was vulnerability. And it was this word out of left field. It was, okay, now I have some understanding of this journey and living in this message of love, life, and freedom. So, what is this about, Jesus? Like we talked about in the last episode, what is going on? Why this word? Where'd this word come from? It's not a word I like. It's not a word I use in a positive way. So, I don't understand what's going on. And so, Michael, what that has been so far about a 4.5 year journey of understanding, of learning, of awakening to things, deepening, and then fulfilling. So, where I am on the cycle right now, in all of that context, I'm in the awakening stage still. Of you asked me to speak at our last encounter weekend, and I did the talk on the wound.
Yeah.
Which is not a fun, the false self, the wound, they're not fun talks to give,
Yeah.
right? Because what happens more often than not, listeners, is you're working on these talks and God gets you on the gurney.
Yeah. That's what I mean by reflecting on that subject matter, thinking about that. It's so intimate and personal.
Yeah.
When you have to search your own wounding stories and what happened and the effect on you.
Right.
In order to tell the stories to others, that's reflection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I mean by it's not something you do in a hurry.
No, and I wouldn't think we'd ever want to be. We could just simply teach about these things very academically.
Yeah.
But I think what makes us different and sets us apart as an organization is that we not only teach about these things, we live them, we're in the midst of them, we're going through them too in the cycle. And so again, back to the cycle of awaken, deep, and fulfill, where I'm at right now in the awaken part of the process is this journey of vulnerability from the last 4.5 years, doing the wound talk back in May. And God awakens me to what my truth has been about my feelings about things. And somewhere along the line when I was a kid, I believed in my heart that how I felt or what I was feeling in a given moment did not matter, that I should put it aside. And the line I said at the weekend in the wound talk was, we'll talk about that later, but it always seemed like the later never came. So
in regards to your feelings,
in regards to going back and addressing how I was feeling or what I might be experiencing. And so what that turned into, that's part of the vulnerability journey, is what God is revealing to me and awakening me to, is that my belief that my feelings didn't matter is a piece of the armor that I put on to protect myself and say, okay, well, if you don't care about how I feel, then I'm just not going to feel, or I'm not going to tell you what I'm feeling, or what I'm really feeling is going to be hidden behind this armor of anger and just that kind of angry energy. So, yeah, that's where I'm at the moment in the Awaken, Deepen, Fulfill journey.
Yeah.
And we've had some moments in our Wednesday groups. The great thing about God and the way that he operates is that he weaves all these things together.
Oh, yeah. The guy sitting next to you is going through something.
He's,
all of a sudden,
he's
boom,
doing that, or we have a conversation on Wednesday that provoked some things, you know, and you hear me say some things that I don't really even remember coming out of my mouth. And it ties back into this whole idea that God is awakening me to in this stage. So it's just really interesting if you're awake to it, right? If you have the eyes to see, if you're situationally aware, you can kind of gather those pieces. Like our friend Jim Shanae says, you know, we want to gather up the dots before we even try to connect them. And that's what he's up to right now.
And that was something we had to come awake to.
Yeah.
And then begin to practice. And then it became true.
Mm-hmm.
Awaken, deepen, and fulfill. It's a great story, SJ. I think for me right now, our organization, our team, our mission, it's always moving. It's pretty fluid, but there are some pretty good things that are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's inviting me to change. I have to be something a little different, something else, and play a little differently. You know, when you're smaller and there's 4 or 5 of us, it's different. You know,
very much so.
We play together, we fight together, and I mean fight the kingdom battle. And and we have our skirmishes too, but when you become 11 team members, how do things get organized? How do we communicate? You can't pull 11 people in the room all the time for meetings and conversations all the time. So learning how to institute some different tools and technology. You know, I was thinking about this literally in this awakening time, SJ. I was thinking about, you talked about churches and pastors and stuff. I was thinking about, you know, That's got to be a crazy hard job,
Oh, yeah.
for a pastor, especially if you've got several hundred people. You don't know those people.
Mm-hmm.
You might know a handful or so. I get to live in the privilege of knowing the handful or so that I work with that were on mission. And I have a lot of people that I know out there in our larger redemptive community.
Sure.
And I can be a teacher or, somebody who shares, or I can be the author guy, the writer in a lot of those places. But here in our world, in our circle, in our organizational chart, it's pushing me into good territory of who am I now? What does it look like to delegate, to give responsibilities? I'm not a big fan of the word control, but responsibilities, control over to other people for them to grow, for them to do what they can do and let them get their fingerprints on it and let them bring their glory to it. Oh, I've never been here before.
Right.
I don't know how to do this. So I find my relationship with God has right now a fair amount of conversations about that. Not just, God, help me do that, bless me in this role I'm in. No, I'm talking about where my thoughts go. I don't think it was warfare the other night. I think it was just the weightiness of, establishing some of these places of impact. Woke up at my normal 3 to 4 a.m. visit to the bathroom, and SJ, I couldn't go back to sleep.
Wow.
Because our mission organization of it just kind of demanded, grabbed my shoulders and said, we're going to talk. I don't know that it was God. I feel like it was just me. So I had to grab some paper, because the more I tried to keep it in my head, the less I'm going back to sleep. The more I could just kind of put it on some pages, the freer my heart and mind got to go back to sleep. So it took a little while to do that. But man, if that's part of this process, okay. It doesn't happen in the convenience of a schedule that you'd like for it to. Awaken,
Right.
Deep, and Fulfill is disruptive,
It's very
provoking.
much so. It's not, hey, I have a window from 10:45 to 11:15 on Tuesday.
Let's
Can we
do
talk about it then?
How about an awakening appointment then? No, this happens. And the enemy's right there trying to, I did say, speak too soon. I mean, there's absolutely accusation in this. You don't know what you're doing. And it sounds like that versus on my response, we've had this conversation. Well, what do you say? What do you say back? Do you say, no, well, you're right. I don't know how to do this, but I know who does, and I know who's with me.
Right. I admit openly, I've never been here before. I mean, can you diffuse that?
Diffuse a good word. That's a great word.
Right.
Because awakening, I want to finish our podcast with this. The enemy can use awakening to diminish you.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you're bringing up something that you're not or don't know how. I mean, I absolutely want to know who's responsible for not teaching me this or not showing me this or, and blame it on the church or blame it on my dad or mom. And then the enemy really starts winning. And versus, hey, they're in training too. They need healing too. Jesus, what is this about? You and me. What are you after? What are you inviting me to see? What are you inviting me to become? That if I do, I'll be more. I'll be more like you. You can entrust me with more privileges, more responsibilities. I go back to our deliverance stuff that we learned a few years ago.
Sure.
Learning how to handle the demonic and being in situations where they needed handling.
Right.
We didn't know how to do that.
No.
And it felt like this is another level. Yeah.
Feels that way because it is.
And it is.
That's right.
And yet you have a power and authority in the kingdom, and he wants you to learn to wield it. Okay. Where's class? Well, I'm going to bring you somebody. You've read about it. You've seen how it's done. You've apprenticed. And we see this with the disciples. Then he turns them loose.
Yeah.
They were being transformed. And those guys who write those letters, SJ, they're not the same guys who walked around with Jesus. And yet they're the same guys.
They're true guys
than
they were before. They were transformed.
They deepened, and then it became more and more true, and then they practiced it.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to talk about. I've got to keep talking about this, but that's Awaken.
Yeah.
I hope we've done it justice.
Yeah.
Anything else on your heart about it?
No, man, that's it. I just think it's important maybe to say It's okay that you're, like you said, Michael, we've never been here before. You've never been here before. That accusation can come. If you don't quite understand what we're talking about, that's okay. We're still learning what we're talking about too. The awakening part of it, it really, in many ways, what my experience has been, Michael, has really highlighted the need for other men that I can trust with their eyes on my life. So I can say things like I said with, I don't think my feelings matter at 50 years old. Well, where's that come from?
Yeah.
Who told you that? What's your experience been? So you can do it on your own, and there's a call for solitude at times. But what that leads me to is the encouragement, men, to connect with our allies network. If you go to Zoweh.org/allies, find some men around you. There may already be a group. We've had that happen, Michael, where a guy comes to a weekend or comes to an event and it's like, man, I'm all alone. Well, there's a group meeting on Tuesdays 10 miles from your house.
That's happened a lot. It's awesome.
So connect with us. We'd love to connect with you with other guys. And check out Zoweh.org/events for our upcoming events for the latter half of this year.
Yeah, I got to say,
it's a great
if you're a guy
process to be in,
and this is intriguing, or the podcast is an additional encouragement to you because you've read the books or you've been a part of our community. But if you haven't been to a weekend this October, the Heart of Aware West, it's worth the flight. It's worth the registration. It is what we're talking about over 3.5 days, 11 sessions, a lot of good free time, and you're in Colorado. That's not too bad.
Yeah.
And I would just really encourage you to go to the website, as SJ said, go to events and get away with God for a couple days.
Yeah. And if the registration's an issue for you, we have something called the Aid Station, where through some generous partners, we're able to offer some partial scholarships to men that want to come to our events. And so reach out to our event coordinator, Sherry, at Zoweh.org. Sherry is my bride, and she gives oversight to that. So thank you guys so much for listening. And Michael, this is great, man. Deepen, fulfill. The last 2 parts of this series are going to be great.
Yeah.
I might be stealing your line here, but it'll be interesting to see what God awakens in us and deepens and fulfills as we talk about it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, which is most important?
Yeah, that's like asking, which one of the wheels on your car is most important. Well,
yeah, you need them all.
You need them all.
And again, transformation is available, restoration, the good that God's up to in your life. That's a good thing to talk about. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
If you got questions or comments you want to send to us, listeners, exploringmore@zoweh.org. And if you would leave us a rate and review on your podcast platform of choice, we'd appreciate it. It helps us get found and helps the message get out there. We'll see you next time.
See you next time on the Exploring More podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is Zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.